Go ahead and we'll go ahead and get started here. Try to get started as close to on time as we can. If we have any more commission members in the audience, if you would come on up, we'll get this thing going. Before we get started, we're going to ask Chairman Shaw if he would to say a prayer for us.
Let's bow our heads. Gracious Heavenly Father, we just ask you to be with us as we gather here today. Thank you for bringing us all here safely. Thank you for each and every person that is here. We ask your guidance upon us as we conduct the business of this commission. Lord, help us to do things that are pleasing to you and to figure out some problems that Georgians are facing. Lord, just continue to guide, guard, and protect us and get us home safe. Amen.
Thank you. All right. Well, we have, it's been a while since we got together. I want to welcome everyone back, the commission back. Appreciate Jeff Parker being with us. I don't know if we've had a meeting since you've been the CEO of MARTA, have we? What number are you, Jeff? All right, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you have not. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for your leadership and looking forward to helping to support your committee.
Thank you. Well, we appreciate you being on board. Looking forward to what your leadership has in store for MARTA, so thank you. We've had a busy commission over the last year and a half, busy session. Appreciate all the work that this commission has done. We're going to hear a little bit about the fruits of that labor here in a little bit from the first real employee, I guess, of the ATL that was created last session. So we'll introduce him shortly, but just want to thank this commission, its members, especially the legislative members who helped work hard during the legislative session on a bipartisan effort to get House Bill 930 through the session. There was a lot of, I don't think Chris Tomlinson's here, so I can tell on him a little bit, but when we first started telling him we planned to move legislation this past session, he laughed. He didn't think that was possible. So we were able, because of the hard work of this commission and the leadership of the speaker and others, to be able to get that done, and we appreciate that. So, all right. Well, I believe our first speaker is actually Scott Haggard, and Scott was with the ARC last session and worked hard with us along with the ARC. The Atlanta Regional Commission has been a partner in this effort from the beginning. We appreciate their work. But now Scott, in his new role, is the first employee of the Atlanta Transit Link, which was created through House Bill 930. So we've asked Scott to come and give us a summary, give the commission members, especially those who are not members of the General Assembly, a summary of House Bill 930, which was the transit bill that passed this past session as a result of your efforts over the past year. So this time we're going to turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the commission. It's an honor to be here with you today. Appreciate that kind introduction. I am excited to be part of the ATL, working with Director Tomlinson and others. I think it is an exciting initiative that you all are responsible for, in large part sort of creating the momentum for HB 930, which passed last session. I'm just going to kind of give a quick sort of overview of HB 930 and sort of the process that we're looking at today, moving forward with the ATL, and then be happy to take questions afterwards. So, as you know, HB 930, which passed this session, created the Atlanta Region Transit Link Authority, or the ATL for short, with the goal of improving in coordination, integration, and efficiency of transit in Metro Atlanta. Passed on March 29th, of course, on sine die. The governor did sign it into law on May 3rd. And what the bill does is it defines the Metro Atlanta area as the 13-county non-attainment area. And it requires the ATL, the new authority, to create a regional transit plan that encompasses all transit projects and initiatives across the region. So it's really meant to be sort of a coordination body, an entity for regional transit that we have not had prior to this entity being formed. What it also did, though, is created access to new funding sources for transit activities that may be in that regional transit plan. And these will be done, I'll get into this shortly, but these will be done on sort of a county-by-county basis where different counties have funding opportunities that they didn't have before. And then one piece that actually is applicable statewide, and I know communities around the state are already discussing ways that they can have use for this, is where any 2 or more neighboring counties outside the 13-county region in Atlanta can hold a referendum to raise an additional sales tax for transit purposes. So there is statewide applicability to this bill, in addition to the pieces that really affected Metro Atlanta. So in summary, the ATL is really a unifying entity that ensures coordinated transit planning and funding across Metro Atlanta, and it kind of oversees all transit activity within the 13-county region. The map you see there, which we'll get into in a little bit, those are the district areas for the ATL board purposes, and we'll talk a little bit more specifically about that shortly. So what we've done at the ATL already is sort of group the 5 areas of activity that the ATL is undertaking into these buckets. And as you see here, regional governance, which is through the board, the ATL framework, the regional transit plan, which is also required by the law, which will include all the transit activities within the 13-county area. Transit funding, which are the opportunities I mentioned that allows for counties to raise revenue on their own for transit purposes. Regional unified branding, which is an important component of HB 930. And then coordination with existing transit operators. So when you think about HB 930, these 5 buckets kind of summarize everything that's contained within the bill. So first, talking about regional governance, as I mentioned, these 10 districts allow for the fact that this new authority is a state authority, so it's a state government entity, but it has local and state insight. And that's because of the makeup of the board and Chairman Tanner's thoughts about how we needed to have regional and local participation in the decision-making process. So it's a 16-member board. It has to be named by December 1st of this year, so you'll be hearing more from us about trying to get that process underway because it is a complex process with a lot of players involved. But the board members will serve 4-year terms. There is some staggering of terms depending on which district you're elected from so that all the board terms don't end at the same time. But of the 10 districts, there will be 1 citizen representing each of those districts, and they're drawn to cross-county boundaries so that people have a regional mindset when they come onto the board and not necessarily just representing their own jurisdiction. So the board members will be chosen by a caucus of state legislators, county commission chairs, and mayors within each district. So any state legislator whose district touches any of these districts will participate in that election. Any county commission chair whose county is part of this district will participate in the election. And then the mayors have a little bit different system where the mayors who are part of that district will get together and select a representative from amongst themselves to participate in the caucus election. One exception to that is if any district includes the parts of the city of Atlanta, then the mayor of Atlanta is automatically part of the district caucus election. So those are the 10 sort of local and regional representatives. Then the Speaker of the House will have 2 appointees. The Lieutenant Governor will have 2 appointees. And then the Governor will have an appointee as well who will serve as the chair according to HB 930. And then Commissioner McMurray, I know he's officially the only board member so far, but he will be the non-voting member of the board and makes up the 16 members of the board total. So the regional transit plan, this is the sort of the second bucket that I referred to earlier. This really is one of the 2 core activities of the ATL. And what the regional transit plan is meant to be is sort of the official multi-year plan for transit services for this entire 13-county area. And so any county that is undertaking transit activities in this 13-county region will be included in this transit plan. And all those activities, all the plans, all the potential expansion projects, all of that is meant to be part of this plan. The HB 930 calls for a 6-year and a 20-year time horizon for this plan, and that is meant to reflect the federal requirements as far as the RTP and TIP and all the different activities that are associated with federal funding and the requirements that the feds put on us for making sure that certain expansion projects and things of that nature are in the plan. The regional transit plan is meant to coordinate existing and future transit service. So any county that already has transit service, or MARTA or any other such authority that's providing transit service now, that will be part of this plan. But then more importantly, anything that's sort of future expansion will also be part of this plan. It'll be developed in consultation with the region's MPOs. The primary one, really the only one for the 20-county region in Atlanta, is the ARC. So that is the MPO. There's a separate MPO actually for Gainesville and Hall County, and also for Cartersville and Bartow County. But neither one of those is part of the 13-county region that's part of the ATL. Regional stakeholders, including local governments, may submit requests to the ATL for additions and amendments to the plan from time to time. So we understand that this will be sort of a changing process depending on how conversations and dialogue are going about transit within the region. But importantly, an important date to remember is that after January 1st of 2019, any referendum transit projects, so any transit projects that are put before voters in any of these 13 counties, must be in the RTP and approved by the ATL. RTP is the Regional Transportation Plan, which is developed by ARC as the MPO. But any project like that must also be approved by the ATL board after January 1st, which again is meant to make sure that all of the transit projects in the region are being coordinated with each other. There's creating efficiency of services and eliminating duplication and things of that nature. So the third bucket I referred to is regional transit funding. Importantly, what HB 930 did was it allowed for a new funding mechanism for counties that choose to do transit projects. Can be used for both capital and operations. It's up to 30 years. A county could put on the ballot a transit-specific SPLOST that could be up to 1% in any increment of 0.05. So the projects that they put on the ballot must be in the regional transit plan and approved by the ATL. Counties outside of the 13-county region, as I mentioned, could pair together to use this new mechanism as well. Importantly, the ATL is meant to be the designated recipient, which is a term for federal funds. So all federal funds that flow into this region that are used for transit purposes go to a specific entity. Today, that entity is MARTA, and it has been for many years, at least since the 70s. This bill is meant to use the ATL as that designated recipient, and that process is already underway. The governor's office is essentially the decider of who the designated recipient is. So conversations are already in process there, and I think you'll see that happening before the end of the year. The scope of the ATL and HB 930 is very clear that the ATL is meant to sort of be the clearinghouse for all federal and state transit funds in the region. So federal and state transit funds that may come through sort of federal programs, discretionary funds, things like that, the ATL will be involved in sort of prioritizing and deciding how those funds are used. And certainly in the future, if the state makes investment in transit, such as how the state recently did with the $100 million in bonds that the governor last week announced would be used for bus rapid transit in North Fulton County along Georgia 400, projects like that would also sort of be coordinated through the ATL in the future. One thing that HB 930 also does is allows the ATL as an authority to issue its own bonds and also work with other state agencies to issue bonds. So that's a feature of the new authority as well. So let me get into sort of specific provisions that deal with Cobb County, Gwinnett County, and Fulton County, because I think these are very important for the region. A lot of conversations and dialogue are going on right now in these counties about how to move forward with the options that were presented by HB 930. Gwinnett County can hold a T-SPLOST referendum on joining MARTA via contract at any time. HB 930 made a few modifications to the way Gwinnett County could participate in MARTA. And so Gwinnett County has several options. Gwinnett County could potentially put a MARTA referendum on the ballot this year if they so chose. If they do that, HB 930 provides that they have one additional board seat on the MARTA Board of Directors that they would not otherwise have if they had joined MARTA in the mechanism that was available to them for many years. In addition to that, Gwinnett County could, if they chose not to do that this year, they could hold a regular transit T-Splost, as I mentioned before, which would be by referendum, up to 1% sales tax up to 30 years. And so that option is also available to them. Cobb County has a special opportunity. The bill provides that Cobb County could create a special taxing district within the county and hold a T-Splost referendum within that district and enter into a contract with MARTA to provide services within the district. And it can do this at any time up until December 1st of 2019. So Cobb has a little bit longer to decide how to proceed. But this is a special opportunity that was available only to Cobb County as a result of the bill. The committee that would decide the special district is essentially a composition of both state legislators and the county commissioners. And so if both of those groups can come to agreement on what a special district would look like, then that opportunity is available to Cobb. So both of those counties actually still have the same opportunity to join MARTA as it existed prior to HB 930. So the MARTA Act for years has provided an opportunity for both of those counties to join, and so those also still exist under the law. Fulton County also has a special opportunity within HB 930, which is to hold a referendum for an additional 0.2% sales tax that could be used for transit. And so this is something I know the county has been discussing and is looking at, and certainly with the $100 million the opportunity that was announced by the governor, as well as some additional federal funds, $184 million that is being put into the Georgia 400 project. This certainly is something that I think Fulton County may have more discussions about. So one of the other buckets that I discussed is regional branding. The regional transit plan has to include unified branding for all transit agencies within the 13-county region. The bill says that as of January 1st, 2019, that any new MARTA asset worth more than $250,000, which would include buses and type equipment of that nature, has to display the ATL logo and brand. And then as of January 1st, 2023, the same brand and logo must be used on any and all MARTA property. So there's a sort of a transition period, I think, for MARTA in the branding question. The conversations, frankly, are still ongoing as to exactly what this is going to look like and what it means. And I think a lot of folks are involved in that. But HB 930 was very clear that branding across all transit agencies should be unified. And so I think that's how we're planning to move forward. You see on the right there that we have at least 10 public transit agencies and operators within the 13-county region at this time. And so having a unified brand across all those in some form or fashion will be much more useful to the customer, and people will be more easily able to understand exactly how our regional transit systems are working together. So the last bucket that I mentioned is sort of coordination with existing entities. This kind of summarizes the different entities that are involved in transit and transportation right now. MARTA still exists and will continue to exist. The bill provides that MARTA has exclusive authority for the region's heavy rail system, both existing heavy rail and any new heavy rail that might be done in the region. That will all be under MARTA. MARTA also will control its current local funding, the sales tax that it receives from Fulton, DeKalb, Clayton, and the City of Atlanta, as well as its federal formula funding. And the bill also says that its current legal contractual obligations are not affected by any of the items that were included in HB 930. GRETA and CERTA, which are sort of sister agencies to the ATL, were all housed together in the same offices. GRETA still exists and will continue to exist, same with CERTA. GRETA will still have authority over the TIP, as well as developments of regional impact and the Governor's Development Council. The ATL, as I mentioned, is administratively attached to GRETA, so we're all housed together. GRETA's role in regional transit will transition to the ATL no later than July of 2020, and the same with CERTA, no later than July of 2021. And CERTA will still remain responsible for tolling, GTIB, the Transportation Infrastructure Bank, as well as transportation financing roles, and the Go Transit program. And some of the other entities that are involved in transit, ARC continues to exist. It remains the Metropolitan Planning Organization under federal law. It will work closely with the ATL on regional transit processes and ensuring that the regional transit plan aligns and integrates with all the federal requirements dealing with the TIP and the RTP and things of that nature. And then certainly the local transit systems like Gwinnett, Cobb, Cherokee, and others that are in the region, they will all continue to exist. And moving forward under the unified branding, hopefully we'll have some better coordination and sort of a more seamless experience for the customer, which is really the goal of all of this, is to have the customer really feel like they're part of a regional system. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions that folks might have.
Thank you, Scott, for that and for all your work, not only in putting this presentation together, but also during session and helping us coordinate with the ARC to get us to this point. One of the things I'll just note for the commission, and the 2 or more county option outside the ATL region is something that as we move forward during these commission meetings over the next few months, we'll probably need to take a look at. I know there's counties like Chatham, Savannah, Athens, Clark that would like to take advantage of this, but they may not have the opportunity to partner with a neighboring county. So as we move forward, we'll listen to input and consider if there needs to be changes to that area of the bill. One of the things you also hit on, Scott, that I think is important for the legislators, I know Representative Oliver and Representative Taylor are both, I think that would be the only ones here that will be in one of these regions, and myself in Forsyth County. Y'all are going to be sending out some information to the legislators and to the commission members who are affected so that they will be able to start thinking about their board members. This initial board is going to be so important for us to find the right group of individuals and to make sure this gets off to the right start. You also hit on something else, and that was the announcement about the money being spent in North Fulton. One of the things that we said during this process was, and I personally feel that it's important that the state have an ongoing financial commitment to transit. So hopefully this is the first of many projects that the state can help fund over the next couple of decades in transit. But I think it's important to note that Friday, Commissioner McMurray will be accepting a check from the federal government. U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary will be in town, $184 million, which is, I believe, the largest single grant that the federal government has ever given out on a transportation project. So we're fortunate to have that here in Georgia. And I think one of the reasons for that is the partnership that Commissioner McMurray, the Speaker, the Governor, and others have been able to partner with our federal partners. They've been to Washington numerous times, talking with them. They see the work we're doing here in Georgia, and this is a true partnership between the federal government, the state, GDOT, MARTA, and Fulton County. So that was always the intent of HB 930, was to create those kind of opportunities. So we're looking forward to being able to have 2 new managed lanes up in North Georgia and on Fulton County, and have bus rapid transit run up to at least North Fulton. And I know Forsyth County has some opportunities there if they choose to move forward with that. So, and then the last thing I just want to mention is the Cobb piece is very unique, and I want to thank Commissioner Ott for all of his work, because I know that was, he was probably as stressed as I was during the last session trying to find a way to pull something together to allow Cobb an opportunity to move forward. And I know it's an uphill battle for Cobb to be able to get an agreement between the legislative delegation and the county commission, but at least that opportunity does exist, and hopefully with partnership with Jeff and the MARTA leadership, we're hopeful that you can come up with some options there. So, all right, number 26, Chairman Commissioner Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to weigh in a little bit on what's happening as a result of the work of this commission in the footprint that I represent on the county commission. When we started this, it was mentioned that, you know, we were going to try and put something forward, and it was iffy. And as much as I was hopeful, I was not sure by any stretch of the imagination we would accomplish what we ended up accomplishing. And so hats off to the legislature for actually doing the work necessary to create this. It may not be perfect, but it certainly is a great framework for the future. As is anything else, it can be altered as is needed, but finally, the state has recognized the importance of public transportation and is putting their money where their mouth is in a big way. I feel very fortunate that Fulton County was ready to accept those funds and partner with the state and MARTA to create, hopefully, viable options of transit up Georgia 400 to connect us to Forsyth County that is sorely needed. Took me almost an hour to get down here this morning, so I wish it was online today. I bet a lot of folks would have been using it. So the only other thing I want to say is we hope that this will be an example for our neighbors in Cobb and Gwinnett that are eligible to join the system today, to see that we can work together and that we have a promising future with public transportation in the North Metro area first of all, but throughout the region ultimately. And it would be wonderful if we could go from Gwinnett to Cobb using a seamless, safe, efficient system that we talk so much about, that I really feel like we're on the verge of creating. So I think it's very positive. I hope the state continues to invest in transit in the upcoming years. Certainly hope so. But I think we have our work cut out for us to prove that it's a worthy investment. So anyway, I think it's great. Thank you, Scott. Welcome to the ATL.
Thank you.
Look forward to working with you.
Good to be here.
Representative Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, the creation of the board is going to dictate the staffing, but I wondered if you could comment as to what you envision the staffing might look like in terms of size and executive director and timetable for that buildup of the appropriate staff.
Thank you, Representative Oliver. That's a good question. My position is Director of Government and External Affairs. The bill provided that Christopher Tomlinson, who's the Executive Director of both Greta and CERTA, that he be the interim Executive Director of the ATL. And so he's functioning in that capacity as well. He's traveling at a conference today and was unable to be here. Heather Aquino, who is the Deputy Executive Director of Greta, CERTA, and the ATL, is here. Raise your hand, Heather. There she is. And so we're in the process right now of sort of looking at all the different personnel needs for the ATL. I think I can say that there are a couple of folks who will be transitioning from Greta CERTA over to the ATL. So, and they're primarily dealing with sort of the funding questions and grants and federal funding, things of that nature. And then as we move forward, I think Chris and Heather will be looking at sort of exactly what the personnel needs are. But it will be a very gradual process, I think.
It obviously seems that you're going to be assuming coordinating responsibilities with Greta and ARC in terms of a variety of functions. So the
Correct.
coordination of those staff functions that'll be overseen in a different way for the entities has to be part of the thought process, I assume.
Absolutely, that's correct. And that's why it is helpful, actually, that the ATL is housed with Greta and CERTA, because we all can have sort of conversations across those agencies. In many ways, these three agencies, I think, are looking at all different mobility options, including, transit being part of that, and certainly working with GDOT on everything they've got going. And so it's meant to be a very seamless process throughout all of the transportation entities with the state.
Mr. Chairman, may I inquire?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Just to be, this may be too much in the weeds or a little bit too concrete, but I'm thinking as an example, the MARTA decision to fund the Emory-Lindbergh line and the announcement last week for the 400. Those are examples of major planning and funding entities for transit. Those decisions will not be reviewed retroactively by the ATL board, correct?
I can't speak to that for certain, but I would think not, because the ATL board does not exist as of today, and as HB 930 provided that existing contracts that MARTA has, they will remain in place and are unaffected by HB 930.
If the board existed today, then, or the future, just as using those two projects as examples, both of those projects under 930 would have to be approved by the ATL board
That's right.
if they were occurred in the future, but there will not be a retroactive look back.
That's correct. That's my understanding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And thank you for all your help, Representative Oliver, during this session on this legislation. Any other questions? All right, again, Scott, thank you very much, and look forward to continuing to work with you to make this all a reality.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you mentioned, we'll be communicating with you about the election process. We have some information broken down by each district to let you know which legislators are involved in that process, and we'll be getting that out to you soon.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, next we have Lauren from Deloitte, and as she's making her way up, let me just say that I want to thank their team. The Deloitte team has been a partner with us in this endeavor over the last year and a half, helping us put together meetings and also pulling from their international resources to be able to bring information to the table that's helped us get to the point that we are. So I appreciate their partnership in this and all the work that they have done for us. Also want us to remember Linda Hamrick, who's also part of the Deloitte team. She lost her husband last week from lung cancer. Linda's a very private person, and I didn't know as closely as I've worked with her that he was sick. So I know she's been working and struggling through that, and lost him last week. He was in hospice care. So as we go through, let's just remember Linda and her family in our prayers, and look forward to her being able to get back with us and when she's ready. So thank you. Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, and everybody else who's here. I'm Lauren Pawalis from Deloitte. And, just wanted to sort of echo a couple of comments, and then we'll jump in here. First, this has sort of been an unbelievable journey for all of us. We had the opportunity and fortune to partner with you all in the state and the folks at CERTA back last October. And our team, which comprises of folks, Seth, who's sitting from GTA, Jeff Booth, who's not here today, and then Linda Hamrick, who the chairman just spoke about. So it's a team effort, and folks across the state that, of course, had transit experience, and Scott at the time when he was ARC, and plenty of other folks. So it takes a lot of folks to get this done. So I'll just want to say thank you. And the journey is just beginning. Let me say that. So with that, you may recall we kicked off a transit governance and funding study back in October. And we'll talk about the three different parts of that. What Scott talked about, which was the culmination of HB 930, was the activities around the metro transit activities, and that will continue forward. But of course, the question that we are posing is not just for metro, it is inclusive of rural and other metro. And for this particular study, which is taking us up to the end of, or actually the beginning of July, we had other activities in addition to these sort of very, very famous HB 930 activities that were taking place. So we'll talk a little bit about that today too. Want to bring you up to speed on what the initial findings are for our rural and our other metro activities, and then sort of the go-forward position that the chairman will pick up towards the later part of the conversation. And we've got a couple of speakers that attended some of these activities, and they will give sort of their perspective as they are sort of run in the rural and other metro activities as well. The core question that we've been asking everybody, and that you've all been living and asking everybody, is sort of, what sort of operational governance policy and funding changes should be made in order to improve the transit activities in the state of Georgia. And that notice is the state of Georgia. So we made sure that we took a look at two things. There was transit and then something called mobility. And you'll find that those terms have different meanings, quite frankly. And we wanted to look at the world of mobility, even though we hear transit a lot, right? But the world is sort of moving people and things around. So mobility is broader. It's multimodal. It allows for folks and things to get to other areas that wasn't there before. So, and it includes a whole lot of different activities and very innovative thinking. So we'll be talking a lot about that as we go forward over the next day and through the course of time. Just to remind everybody, and I'm sure you probably have thought about this, but if you have a metro mindset, sometimes it's important to sort of pull back a little bit and think about the full state. So metro is inclusive of the 13 counties, and everybody, I think, has that sort of seared in their memories, if not certainly from the HB 930 activities. But there are 28 other counties that comprise what's called other metro, and then there's 111 counties that comprise rural. And that's our 159 glorious county structure that we have in the state of Georgia, which is pretty robust. I would tell you, as we've been doing comparative looks from state to state, Georgia has by far top numbers of counties, which is interesting from a governance and funding perspective. It also serves as opportunities, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So, and then of course, you know, we did want to show that there are about 7 counties that are in the rural category that are moving up based on sort of, you know, their population and economic development activity. So this is sort of how we are looking at the construct. All right, just as a reminder for the study, we wouldn't be consultants if we didn't have some kind of Gantt chart. So we figured we'd throw this in here. And for those of you who've been part of these commission meetings, which most of you have been from the beginning, this is the same chart we've been seeing, and kind of really cool. You see we are here, which Jeff, hopefully that reminds you of the MARTA station. You know, we are here and we're going to go there, right? And use a little star there, you know, little transit humor. Okay. We've got our activities that we kicked off back in the fall, and we're looking at the Metro Atlanta systems, and not that that work is done, but I think we all agree that we are in a great trajectory there, and we've got the stand-up of the ATL, and there's a lot of work to do, but that's more so in what I'd call executing and getting that stood up, and sort of making sure that that works. The 2 other areas are rural systems and other metro systems are happening right now. And although this particular phase will end July 11th, like I said, there will be a second phase of the commission, and I'll let the chairman talk to you all about that as it relates to the commission responsibilities. But as we were continuing through the later part of the winter, spring, and now into the summer, we have been able to collect a lot of information and get out there and talk to some folks. So we have been doing and performing what's called greenhouse labs. A handful of you sitting on the commission have participated in the Metro one, a couple of you, and I know Commissioner McMurray has been to 2 of the 3. It's an accelerator. It's a day-long activity where we get folks from the different areas, geographically related, transit related, and it accelerates the conversation around topics that are most important to them because we don't have a lot of time, right? And so what we're trying to do is get a vision and some feedback and recommendations that are going to be most important to those folks who are actually in the environment. So we have split these greenhouses up into what we call acts, 3 acts, right? So when you come, it's an 8 to 4, we feed you, so we don't let you sort of just sit there. It's a very interactive activity, and we divide it up so that in the beginning we say, hey, what's the purpose and context of the day? Talk about that. We talk about where we're going and then how we get there. So at the end of that day, we actually have some what I'll call sort of tangible next steps to follow up on as it relates to whether it's other metro or rural in terms of governance, funding, recommendations, and so on. Okay, so the other metro greenhouse we conducted, and we conducted that just recently in Athens. We do get out of Atlanta. As much as we love Atlanta, we do leave. And so as you can see, you can take a look. I don't know if it's very easy for you to see, but we invited a good representation of folks that are part of the other metro community. And it's important that we were able to have a representation of folks that are related to that environment. And some of it is education-based, if they're part of that system. Some of it is actually related to, for instance, the Department of Community Health, right? Because they interact with other metro folks as well. We had some folks from Georgia Power. We invited Uber. They were not able to attend. We're going to be talking with them, but they're really important to this conversation as you get outside of metro. Just sort of, I'll give you a second to take a look, but certainly different transit mechanisms to sort of get their buy-in and conversation for the day. Okay. we took them through an opportunity, and it's funny, you know, they have lived this most of their careers, a lot of them. So you would think, why would it be important to provide them a current state of the other metro environment? You would think, well, they should know that, or it would be something that they could tell you. But you know, oddly enough, until you actually put everything together and have them sort of take a look at what the other metro environment is, oftentimes they don't realize where the gaps are, what the synergies are, what actually exists, what they could use. So we provided sort of a current state analysis, and they did what's called a wall walk. So imagine you're up and you're walking around the room and you're seeing all of the information related to your environment. And it's kind of an eye-opening moment, because you may live in Athens or Savannah or Macon or Rome or Valdosta, and you look at something, you're like, wow, I didn't realize they were doing this, or somebody else in the other city was doing that, or another county was doing this. So it provided a good opportunity and conversation to compare. Notice the number of transit planning organizations that exist in the other metro areas. 10 regional commissions, 15 metropolitan planning organizations. So let that sink in for a minute. It's a lot, right? You all thought metro was difficult enough, right? There's a lot of constituents here that we have to be mindful of. Also, mobility options, right? So there is unfortunately no MARTA out there, or there is no sort of BRT in some cases in the same way. Or if there is, it's in a small area, or it's connected to an educational facility. Just things are a little bit more truncated and not as free-flowing. There are ride-hailing services, maybe not as comprehensive as they would like. So we sort of did a current state analysis. And then we said to everybody, okay, you're leaders in your environment. What is it that you would like as a vision without sort of constraints? In terms of if you were actually able to create a transit system in other metro, what is it that you would be looking for? What are those particular attributes? And take a look. It may not surprise you, but it's actually really important, because this is coming from the folks who actually want to help build this, right? So accessibility, affordability, efficiency. They want it connected, integrated, coordinated, and seamless. So as we're hearing this, and for those of you who are in the metro greenhouse, some of these were similar attributes. So when you hear these ideas and you think about how do you want to take these and then put them into a construct of a governance structure in other metro, that's kind of the feeder of the conversation. Okay, so take a look at the draft vision statement. We asked everybody, hey, if you could walk around and explain to your constituents what the vision statement would be. Here's just an example. So a sustainable and reliable multimodal transit mobility network that connects urban and rural communities and enhances economic opportunity. Now, that's a mouthful. You probably have to write that down and read it a lot, and but you get the essence of what you're looking for there. The other metro folks say, hey, look, we need things connected. We want this to be sort of the gateway for economic development, and it needs to be sustainable and reliable. So we got to be thinking about all of those things as we're crafting what we think the governance structure is, and then how you actually fund it. Okay. So throughout the course of the day, we then said, well, if you have an opportunity to kind of create what the design principles were, here would be the 4 areas. You'd want to connect regions. So the other metro folks had some real sort of connections to their regional commissions. And we'll talk in a minute about rural, very different scenario. So they want to connect their regions. They want to tailor and synchronize their services. They want to coordinate governance. But they do want a diverse and reliable funding source. So they don't want to necessarily just be reliant only on Fed money or state money or local money. They want sort of a portfolio that allows them to sort of decide how they can spend it and where and when. Okay? So we asked them, how would you like the state to be a part of your lives in the other metro world? And you can see, hey, they all thought they needed a state, a little bit more of a state role involvement for some high-level planning, some strategy and oversight. We asked them about the MPO's role, city government's role. You can see. Interestingly enough, nobody in this group pushed back and said, we don't want anybody's help, leave us alone. You never know, because, quite the opposite. They want a shared, centralized activity with the ability to actually control their own destiny. But sort of, they understand the power of a centralized planning effort to maximize their ability for funding and governance. Okay, then we talked about money, right? Because governance is great. Love governance, but you can't do anything without money. And so they go hand in hand. And we said, so if you were able to sort of come up with your own sort of portfolio of funding mechanisms, how would that be? So, of course, there was a discussion around federal funds, but everybody realizes that that is only so good and so important and may not be the future, quite frankly. Transit SPLOST conversation came up. Other local funding mechanisms, public-private partnerships, and then incentivizing the private sector, right? So there was a lot of conversations. So Georgia Power was there, conversations to say, hey, if we could get the public sector to ante up some money while we had our employees utilizing their mechanisms, that actually could help us. So, and other benefits that would come along with transit. Okay, so I'll stop there for a second. So any comments on the other metro? So keep in mind, this is information and input that we're gathering. We've got a lot more deep dive, but that was the other metro bit. Thoughts on that one? Surprises? Eye-opening moments? All right. Now we're going to switch to rural. Remember the numbers, 111 counties in our glorious 159 county setup that are considered rural. This one was the largest greenhouse that we had conducted, and for good reason, because there was a lot more people to bring in. And it was fine, and it worked out great, and high energy, and everybody was very, very excited to be here. And we actually conducted this one down in Macon. And in full disclosure, Macon's not rural, but Macon's not Atlanta. And it was easier, actually. We had given the options for the rural folks to meet any place else, and they all wanted to come to Macon, so we picked Macon. So we did not pick Waycross or Thomasville or any of those places, but we were ready to go there. Lots of folks. And again, we had representation from the education folks, private industry, lots of counties. Also, again, DCH and DHS. And that conversation was really, and GDOT, of course, so I wouldn't forget about Commissioner McMurray. Really important, because lots of funding that's coming from Medicaid has a lot to do with transit for rural. And so we will be using that as part of a conversation down the road for how we want to maybe focus in on some of the efforts for rural. Okay. Take a look at this. So you all know this, right? So Georgia's population is about 10 million and growing. More than 2 million of our residents live in rural counties. Everybody know that, right? For us, it was a bit surprising. Good number of us live here, but we live in Atlanta, quite frankly, and so we're really getting up to speed. But that's a lot. It's a lot. Lots of regional commissions, but there's just high need for some kind of construct that, quite frankly, doesn't really exist in any real structure for transit. 65 rural agencies and operators, 16 transit planning organizations. That's a lot. Okay, we asked them the same question. Different folks with a mind for rural. What are your attributes? Look familiar? Accessible, efficient, coordinated, seamless, sustainable. They are looking desperately for connections, for jobs, healthcare, education, and workforce training. There was no lack of, we were like, typing and writing and everything else, and it was pretty unanimous in terms of what they were looking for. And in their case, they were talking about connection to critical services, and that's an interesting word, critical services. And so we're going to unpack that a little bit more. A little different than the other metro folks, right? Because the other metro folks have a little bit of a structure in place already. They are seeking sort of a larger ability than what they have. Rural really doesn't have much, and they are looking to actually establish something that, from the ground up, quite frankly. All right, design principles. Be relevant and accessible. Not to call out Commissioner McMurray, but he kept us honest, because one of the conversations we had was it sounded like we were trying to solve for world hunger. Do you remember that, Commissioner? And it was, yes, he probably does. And, and it was, listen, we got to be relevant and accessible here, right? Whatever governance structure or whatever attributes we want to come up for rural, it's something that has to be achieved. We can shoot for the stars and we don't want to not push the envelope, but we want something that actually can be achievable so that we can make progress. Critical to connect those needs, right? So connect critical needs, access for all rural Georgians, and innovate to meet funding needs. So innovate, we're going to talk a lot about that. You have heard, I'll just throw out some ideas. You've heard sort of across the world, in the telecommunications world, folks who never had the landline went right to cell phone, right? I mean, we in the United States are still, some of us, I still actually have a landline. I know, shoot me, right? But we have a lot of places in the world that don't. It might be that as we are studying the rural environment, that we go from where we are today to something and skip over certain things that we currently would have had because we got to get faster to the end. So just, this is an innovation that may be a little bit different even than other metro. We'll have to see. Not trying to lead the witness, just telling you that time is not on our side to make progress. We got to move. Okay, we also asked similar questions about your governance direction. How do you want the state to play? Local government's role, shared roles, regional commission's role. So take a look at what they've said about the state's role. Incentivize regional coordination, enable transit across county and regional lines, training and planning support, provide a mechanism for blanket purchasing. Sound familiar? Think back to the metro, right? Similar kinds of constructs. They want the opportunity to come together, have something that's efficient in one place. They don't want to be told what to do operationally per se, but they want it to have economies of scale so that they can move out fast. So take a look. Shared roles, collaborate to develop high-level policy and planning, purchasing, informing their citizens of options. Okay. Money, right? Streamline receipt of distribution of federal funds. We didn't make this up. We're just reporting out, right? A governance body at the state level that is sponsored by a new or existing state agency to handle sort of all that money, right? Because they realize that if there's not a place where they can actually have one place for the money to be looked at across the board, it might be siloed and they might sort of squander that opportunity. Flexible funding and leverage local funding. Okay. So before we break, it's actually pretty exciting for us because I mean, the energy level in the rural greenhouse I thought was palpable, and they are ready to you know, get out there and try and get together on some structures to get going. And they don't have the T-SPLOS like the Fulton and the Gwinnett's, quite frankly, and the Claytons soon to be and such. And they don't have the MARTAs, and they don't have much of these things, but they want to try. And so we are doing some benchmarks across the country in other rural settings. So states like Kansas, Maryland, Illinois, what's the other one? Massachusetts, thanks guys. Massachusetts, right? Oddly enough, they're similarly set up, right? Where they have a metro center of, say, a Boston, and Jeff, you'll know this, right? But the rest of the state is very rural, and so they've actually been able to tackle a lot of their transit issues. And so we're gonna go and learn about that because it's important for the state of Georgia to make sure that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we need things to be Georgian. So we're gonna take a look at that. Any comments on the rural information that I just passed on to you? It's a lot of stuff. Okay, well, we look forward to the journey continuing on. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. One of the things that we heard about early on in the commission meetings when we first started last year was how many different state agencies and federal agencies there are where money flows through. That seems to be one of the things as we listened at the rural and the other urban center greenhouses that they talked about also was there's so many, they have to determine what type of trip it is, that's how they get reimbursed. Yes. So being able to streamline that process seems to be something that everyone wants. Now, we all know when we're dealing with the federal government, sometimes that's a lot easier said than done. But one of the things that is encouraging, I think, is that we seem to have Secretary of Transportation and others at the federal level who are interested in those similar things. So maybe we can accomplish some of that. Any questions? All right, thank you. I know the next slide there says break, but if everyone's okay with it, we're running just a few minutes behind. I'd like to just keep on going to the next presenter, which is Miss Moss from the Hall Area Transit. And I know, I believe you were involved in our greenhouse, and I appreciate you being here, and look forward to hearing from you. So I'll turn it over to you.
All right, well, very good. Well, thank you for having me. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So there are 5 things I want to accomplish today. The first thing I want to accomplish is to say thank you to all of you guys for the existence of this committee, for everything that you've done to this point, and everything that I hope that you'll do in the future. I also want to share some particular issues related to small urban areas, which is the community I represent. And I also want to introduce you to a recent transit development plan that our community undertook in 2016. It was finished in 2017. And I want to share with you the amount of enthusiasm that got created out of that transit development plan. And then I want to tell you how that plan got derailed and what I think you can do to put it back on track. So before I begin, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm Philippa Lewis Moss, and if you can't tell by my accent, I am from the left coast. Don't hold that against me. Originally, I'm from the Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area. I grew up on transit. I've been riding transit since I was 5 years old. If you can see in the slide above, the house on the lower right-hand corner is the house I grew up in. Next year, it will be 100 years old. I used to take the bus 3 hours every day, 1.5 hours from my home in that lower right-hand corner to the all-girls private school, which is the picture just above it, 1.5 hours each way, 3 buses, the 56 to the 57 to the 33, because my parents wanted me to have a private education, and that's what I did. But on that trip, I discovered my community. And by discovering my community, I discovered myself, which then, of course, moved me into public service, political science, public policy and administration, going to the University of California at Irvine, the University of Southern California, and then Kennesaw State University for a master's in conflict management and a licensed mediator. Today, I serve as the director of the Gainesville Hall County Community Service Center. It is actually a human services organization. So unlike many of your previous speakers who are all focused on public transit specifically, my objectives are in the area of human services. We have 3 buildings there. Over the last 17 years that I've been with the agency, we've provided a number of services, most of them being senior services. Meals and Wills, senior centers, counseling, psychotherapy, parenting education, financial services, things of that nature. And the lower picture in the lower right-hand corner is our new Senior Life Center that we built just a couple of months ago with $1.5 million in SPLOST dollars. So I share that information with you because part of my job is actually being out of the office and helping and supporting and advising and consulting with local nonprofits and other government agencies like United Way, like the Chamber of Commerce, like the North Georgia Medical Center, like University of North Georgia, Bernal, Lanier Tech, and things of that nature. And one of the things, although those organizations are all very vast and different, the one thing that they all share in common is the challenge they all face, which is getting their constituents to them. Doctors are concerned about getting their patients to them, medical compliance. Teachers are interested in getting their college students to them. And one of the biggest challenges we have now, because one of the great things that are happening in Georgia and across the nation is we have lowering unemployment. And the biggest complaint that we have of employers these days is we can hire people, we can recruit them, but we can't get them here. And when we get them here, they're paying $5, $7 for a taxi. So they're using the first hour of their workday paying to actually get there and back. And so I'm not telling you anything new. So let me go ahead and tell you about the Transit Development Plan, which was really exciting. My agency, the Community Service Center, joined forces with, of course, the MPO, which is called the Gainesville Hall County Metropolitan Transit Organization, Planning Organization, and J.R. Wilburn and Associates. And about 18 months ago, we got together and we asked them to do 2 things. We said, look at both our fixed route bus service, which receives Section 5307 funds, and look at our demand response countywide bus service that receives 5311 funds, and look at our coordinated transportation system. And they did. And as you can see here on the slide, you know, we have a very small system, a total of 20 buses. 6 of those buses operate on a fixed route bus service that are mostly within the city of Gainesville. And then we have a demand response, basically door-to-door service that serves about 426 miles. And when we asked the consultants, tell us about our characteristics, and one of the things they said is, well, you've got a low ridership load, but you're also incredibly financially efficient. But the reason you have a low ridership load is because you're spread out. You got 426 miles that you're covering, so you're not incredibly efficient. I'm not sure how well you can see this slide. I actually have something here at my seat, but this is a map of Hall County, and that is a day in the life of our demand response system. All those dots represent households that we go to and pick them up and take them to school and work and medical appointments. And as you can see, the greatest location where they're going is into the large urban area, which is the city of Gainesville, because 90% of our community's resources are in the city of Gainesville and Oakwood. And so I call this organized chaos. The sites people most frequently go to are aging places, local recreation, employment, shopping, medical, and of course, institutions of higher education. But the demand for transit in our community, like a lot of small urban communities, is growing. To get to Hall County, of course, you take 85 North or 985 North. That corridor 985 North, you know, I started driving it 17 years ago. I could almost put it on cruise control easily and literally not pay attention. I could had my coffee, put my top down, and enjoy it. Now I'm gripping the steering wheel. Traffic is starting to flow in that direction. Of course, we have a beautiful new Net One Medical Center in Brazelton. Has brought a lot of excitement to our community and a lot of economic opportunities, but the traffic is increasing. And if you happen to live in Gainesville, Hall County, and you're starting to come south to jobs in Gwinnett and Atlanta, it's a hot mess. People can be in traffic up to 2 hours. In fact, I was late getting here today. I work in Hall County, but I live in Gwinnett and Swanee, and 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm in traffic. So, and as I said, the good thing that's going on in both Gainesville and Georgia is that our unemployment rate is declining, which is awesome. But that also means an increased demand of employers to get people to work. This is before the July 1st rule about using your phone and your camera. This is me taking a picture of traffic behind me and in front of me. Okay. So the transit development plan that we conducted, as I said, 18 months ago, gave us some really great recommendations, and none of it was unusual, but they very much reflected the needs of our community, things that people have been saying for years. And basically what they said is, look, you need to expand your operating hours. You work from 6 to 6, but people work second and third shifts. We need you to operate later, maybe from 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. We also need you to reduce your headway. People on your system have to wait an entire hour for a bus. So if they miss a bus, they have to wait another hour. They also said you need to expand your routes into industrial areas where there's more manufacturing. And so we actually designed 3 brand new routes. And they said you should really consider doing Saturday service and Sunday service. And they said you need to improve your customer amenities, bus shelters, things of that nature. And you need to make better use of technology. And what a lot of people in our community said, for those people who are commuting to Atlanta, is we want express bus service. We're tired of being in our cars by ourselves, sitting between 985 to 85. And so that was a very big push. So anyway, I got on the road and started chatting with people in Gainesville, Hall County about these recommendations and their thoughts. And everyone was really very excited. But there are some barriers to moving forward. And of course, that barrier is money. And what I want to point your attention to is this spreadsheet here shows you that from the year 2004 to the year 2016, our community left $6.6 million in federal funding on the table. And as you all know, to draw down funds for 5307, your fixed route bus service, you require 50% match. And our community has only put up a small portion of that match. And so that means we actually leave money on the table and we become a donor community. I think what's important for me to point out here is in 2004, when our designation changed from rural to small urban, it kind of all took us by surprise. Now, mind you, we're planners and so forth. We were paying attention to the demographics and the numbers and so forth. But we really didn't know what was going to happen when that designation changed. And all of a sudden, we went from having very little transit money to all of a sudden having this incredible windfall of $700,000, $5 million. But we really didn't have a plan for how to handle that. And I think a lot of Georgia communities today are going to have that challenge in the upcoming 2020 census when rural communities go to small urban. And in our case, our community is going to go from small urban to large urban because we're going to exceed the 200,000 population number. And so one of the things I think we need to do better as a community is work with our elected officials, work with our city and county managers, and make them aware of the demographic changes, the population changes, and let them know what's coming down the pike in terms of funding or even the restriction of funding. So we're trying to figure out, we've got all these wonderful ideas for the transit development plan, and we want to get them done, but we can't quite get the local dollars to do this. But in comes Mincy Marble, which is a private for-profit organization in Hull County. And if you've ever been to a hotel, probably anywhere in the United States, chances are Mincy Marble designed their bathrooms, all right? They just built about an 8 football field length facility in Gainesville, Hull County. And of course, one of their biggest challenges and requests is we got to fill that place with employees. We got to get people there. And so they want to connect with public transit. So what they said to us is, we will help you draw down that local match. We'll actually give you some money. And then we'll connect you with other private for-profit organizations in this corridor, and we'll help convince them to give you money to pay that local match. Well, I'll tell you, I just about jumped out of my seat. So, I started presenting this information to the Georgia Planning Association. I went to the Georgia Transit Association, and everyone got really excited because we created this template for how to enroll private companies into public transit, this public-private partnership. One of the things we did is we created a specific survey for each and every employer where we actually surveyed the employees and made sure that the company's assertions were correct, that their employees would actually use the bus. How much would they pay for the bus? How often do they need the bus? What time do they need the bus, and so forth and so on. And then what we did is we took all their employee addresses and we mapped them onto our existing routes. And once we did that, we were able to determine if we needed to design a brand new route or if those employees could ride the existing routes. And what we determined, for example, in the case of Mincy Marble, at that time they had 233 employees, that 95% of their employees already lived within walking distance of current Gainesville Connection fixed route bus stops. So we went back and we asked the question, well, your folks already live near bus stops. Why aren't they riding it? Why is this a problem? And once again, it's the hours dummy. It's because our employees need to be at work at 6 o'clock and you don't even start your engine until 6. And so once again, we went back and said, okay, we'll change the service hours. And then the other thing they did is they said is, some of our employees have never ridden the bus before. They're a little concerned. And so what we did is we created customized bus routes for each and every of their employees. Basically, we said for Jose, you exit your house, you turn right, you go 3 blocks, you pick up this bus, you ride it for 3 blocks, you get off, you catch this bus, and you get to work. So anyway, as I said, we shared this with lots of other transit communities, and people were very excited that we were able to create this great template. And we also did something what we call a teach and ride, where we went out to the employers and basically had a fair and talked to the employees about transit, helped them overcome some of their fears, and got them enrolled in the idea. But then something happened. A few months ago, we had a Planning Association meeting there in Gainesville, Hull County, and one of the speakers introduced an old conversation, not even a new conversation. And that conversation had to do with the upcoming 2020 census. And part of what this individual shared was that when the 2020 census comes, Gainesville Hall County will move from a small urban to a large urban community. And when that happens, you will lose 50%, you will lose your 50% match. And oh my goodness, our elected officials just gasped. And the plans that we had to improve the service, extend the routes, literally stopped dead in their track. I don't really have much more to say other than that. As I said earlier, one of the things we need to do is help local governments understand the implications of changing designation status. Our community has done a lot over the last 17 years to help grow and develop public transit, but a 50% gap is huge, and they can't close it by themselves. We're very grateful for the legislation that just passed and the ATL. And we hope that as this committee continues to meet, that there'll be more things that we can do for small urban communities like our own. I think I've probably extended my time, and I don't want to be redundant because I think the folks from Deloitte did a really good job summarizing some of the things that can be done. And with that, I think I'll just stop and answer any questions you may have.
Appreciate that. I've got a couple. You answered one of them that I'd written down, but one of the things that I see in outside the metro area, where most folks that live in Metro Atlanta know about transit, they know where it's located. Many of them grew up riding transit. But when you get outside Metro Atlanta in a place like Hall County that has grown over the last 20 years, or you get into a place like I live, a lot of people just don't know the service exists.
Right.
And it sounds like that's one of the things you ran into in working with Mitzi Marble, that the employees that worked there really didn't know, I can walk to a bus stop now and actually take advantage of transit. So it seems like that's one of the things that rural Georgians running transit programs in other urban centers really have to do, is find ways to educate their constituency that services are out there. Is that something you've found
Right.
also?
I agree. Many people either don't know the system exists or they don't think it's for them, particularly for your demand response services. They think it's for older adults, and it's for everyone. And so there's some misconceptions. So definitely marketing is a very important component.
That's one of the things I found. I live in a rural community, and we have the Dial-A-Bus type program. And when I'm talking to people about transit, one of the things I found is they think that it's only for seniors, and that it's only for folks who maybe have a handicap or a disability to be able to ride. But they don't realize if they need transportation, it's there for them. One of the other things I think that Hall County is very similar to a lot of other urban centers outside Metro Atlanta is you're pulling in a great number of people from surrounding areas. Even though your transit service only operates within Hall County and Gainesville, but places like Dawson and Lumpkin and Jackson and Banks, they have dial-a-bus programs that are transporting a lot of people into Hall County every day for doctor's appointments, educational opportunities. There's not a lot of coordination between those services. So I think that's one of the things that we really have to take a look at, is how can we do a better job coordinating those services, because I think I know I live in Dawson County, and I know that our Dial-A-Bus program transports a lot of people to Northeast Georgia Medical Center and to other places within Hall County for medical purposes. So and again, we're going to have to get all of us, including myself, are going to have to get educated on the funding side of this from rural locations. But so you're saying that when you go to a large urban center, which is over 200,000, that you no longer get the 50% match, that you have to pay 100% of the cost for operations. Is that correct?
Right. It looks like we may be eligible for something called Section 5307, Title 3A. So there's one table within the section that would give us a fraction of what we're currently get. So we'll probably get about 5% of what we're currently getting. But for our elected officials, it basically looks like zero. So it's 7 years from now. And our officials are right to stop and say, hey, look, we need to rethink this, because of course they don't want to invest in something they can't afford in 7 years. And I just think future, cities and counties can learn from us in anticipation of these changes. And if they had a template that they could use, to be prepared, that would be helpful.
One of the things Deloitte brought out that came up during the greenhouse is having a centralized entity within an existing state agency or a state agency that coordinated all of this service, so that there's people who are able to talk to and make sure that places like Hall understand what they're going to be dealing with. Seems like that would be important and helpful.
I agree. For example, GDOT partners at GDOT are wonderful, excellent customer service. I barely wait 30 minutes for any return call. They'll be on vacation and even return my call, so they're like an extraordinary staff. And what I notice about the Department of Transportation, Intermodal, as well as the Department of Human Services, which provides coordinated transportation, is they basically have a regulatory model. So they're about compliance and policies and procedures and so forth, which is great. But what a lot of small urban and rural communities lack are that technical expertise. I dare say if I left my community, there are not many people behind me who have the transit experience and knowledge that could follow me. We have a lot of roads and bridges guys. But what I found in the 17 years I've been doing this work is, once again, when we moved from a rural to a small urban community, we basically reinvented the wheel. And that's what people are doing throughout Georgia, is every time they go from rural to small urban and small urban or large urban, they're reinventing the wheel. And so not only do we need the regulatory component of some agency, but we need some folks that are actual practitioners in the area of transit who can help people think about how you create a very efficient system.
All right, thank you. Chairman Taylor.
Yeah, I'm actually going to direct this to Mr. Haggard. ARC, talking about this, the growth when we're talking about redistricting on 2020 census in 21. What I'll call the explosive growth, having been part of the redistricting in 11, from rural to the concentration in a metro, that growth up the 400 corridor, where do you see that going? I mean,
Yeah, I think certainly from the ARC perspective, our population forecasts continue to show significant growth in the, I say R, no, I'm no longer R, but the forecasts continue to show growth in the northern part of Georgia, particularly the northern part of the metro area. Places like Hall County, places like Dawson County,
Forsyth,
County.
yep.
And I think the rural areas, certainly are seeing some declining population, and obviously the House Rural Development Commission is looking at that as well. But I think the trends that we see right now are certainly that areas like that are sort of on the periphery of the Atlanta region will continue to grow, and ARC shows that approximately 2.5 million more people will come to the Atlanta region by 2040. So it's a significant question.
When was the last data? I remember doing this before. When was the last study you guys did on that?
The population forecasts are released every year around August. So I think would have been last August, and then there will be some upcoming in about 2 months.
Could you provide that to pretty much everybody on the commission here?
Certainly,
because I think it's really important to look at that, because I mean, it was a surprise last time we redistricted. Everybody pretty much south of like Warner Robins, those districts got combined, and everything in Hall, Forsyth, North Gwinnett, it just exploded.
Certainly, be glad to provide that information. And to Chairman Tanner's question about sort of the categories that you fall into, I think it's 50,000 you go from rural to small urban, and then after 200,000 you go from small urban to large urban. And so once communities hit these population numbers, then that's when all the federal funding formulas change.
And I think it's important to sort of educate people that are elected officials, whether county commissioners or city council people in that area, because what ends up happening is when I moved here, Forsyth County was like it's the end of the world. Now it's a huge population. Hall, same way. And looking at that, just being able to leverage those things, some education in advance would be definitely helpful to those, what I call those check off the box points. We're at this level now, or this level now, or above it.
Yeah, I'll make sure that ARC is able to get that information to all of y'all.
Roger that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just say to Ms. Moss, what a great job you've done there at Gainesville Hall. I've been able to be a witness to that for many years now, maybe too many years, but I would just commend you on, again, the public-private relationship and really to be a part of that. Obviously, the outcome is not where you want it to be now, but I think that's a great model for the rest of the state to see how that does connect, and even to the rural piece. That was a lot of what we heard in the greenhouse on the rural, was connecting to jobs and how critical that is. And you can see what that partnership can be, and then to have the tailored technology, because again, I guess Lauren said it, and yes, I have a landline too, so you're not alone, but everybody's just about's got a cell phone now, and so having that technology, that real-time information, and making it easy and attainable was not hard. I mean, you're able to accomplish that, and when you can make it that ease of the commute, if you will, whatever that is, and that last mile conversation, you basically teed it up and gave it to them, and turn by turn for each employee, which is awesome. So I think there's a lot to be learned and to be shared across this state of what you're able to accomplish. Along that effort. So that certainly should be applauded, and those are the kind of opportunities I think we continue to look for as the state of Georgia, and how to connect people to jobs, and again, the same could be done for people to whatever the critical need is that they have for the use of transit. So just congratulations and thanks for your efforts, and just to the Transit Commission is the conversation from small urban to large urban is very real. There's been counties that have experienced that, and talking about it early now is very important as that comes forward, because there is a significant financial consequence there that you got to be prepared for, so that it is seamless, and that all of a sudden you're not left trying to figure out how to operate a transit system with less money than you previously had. And because the demands have not gotten smaller, they've gotten bigger. So thank you for bringing that to the attention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Oliver.
I didn't know about this change of financial, is the policy behind that historically that a bigger entity, maybe Commissioner, maybe you could answer the policy, a bigger entity population area should be raising its own money totally without that much federal support? Is that the policy?
Right. So this is not new. This has been in existence for decades. I can't remember a time where this did not exist. So basically, the federal government they're walking with you during this trip of developing your transit system. And at one point they say, okay, you're big enough. Okay. We're going to let go of your hand, and you should have this handled.
Any other questions? Ms. Moss, again, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your help during the Greenhouse Day also, and we look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, next we have Lee Trainer from Georgia Department of Human Services, Transportation Programs and Funding. Thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Leanne Trainer, and I am with the Georgia Department of Human Services. I manage the Coordinated Transportation System, and I am pleased to follow up Felipe's presentation. That was so wonderful. I think we share a lot of the same concerns, and I hope that today I can explain how DHS Coordinated Transportation fits in the larger picture of Georgia's transit and transportation situation. Commissioner Crittenden sends her apologies for not being able to be here today as well. So Coordinated Transportation supports the DHS mission, which is Stronger Families for a Stronger Georgia, by providing access to services. What is DHS Coordinated Transportation? DHS is charged with managing coordinated transportation, specifically the Office of Facilities and Support Services and the Transportation Services section manage the coordinated transportation effort of the department. It's an interagency system that serves seniors, adults with disabilities, and other eligible customers whose transportation options are limited and make it difficult to access vital human service resources. The Transportation Services section is charged with providing access to these resources to enhance customers' health, independence, self-sufficiency, while increasing efficiency and reducing costs. So transportation services under Coordinated Transportation for DHS are provided for customers of our partner agencies, such as the Division of Aging Services, Division of Family and Children Services, the Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency, and also the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. Each of our partner entities determines eligibility for their customers, and they actually order the services for their consumers and fund the services in part. So here we have a map of the 12 DHS regions. This is how the DHS splits up the counties by region across the state. Coordinated Transportation operates via purchase of service contracts in each of these 12 regions. We have at least one contract in each of the regions, and some services are provided to DHS and our other customers in all 159 counties. Not every consumer group is served in each county, but some kind of services provided in each county for DHS and or DBHDD. We have regional transportation offices that are staffed in each of the 12 DHS regions. And we also have district operations managers who manage those regional offices. The field staff is really the key to the success of the system. They provide oversight to the counties within their service areas. The regional offices, in coordination with the other field staff and local representatives from our partners, design the services, coordinate the services, and actually monitor the services. So we're taking into consideration the differences that exist in each of the DHS regions as it, applies to population, urban areas, suburban areas, rural areas, to make sure that our contracts and contractors are able to effectively cover and serve based on individual needs in each of those regions. Contracts are secured in each region to provide these services for customers. Our providers at DHS are a mix of governmental entities, for-profit entities, and private nonprofits. Contractors are reimbursed for services using a fee-for-service reimbursement methodology. We pay providers based on a one-way trip service. It's a rate for each trip that they provide. And in many regions, a lead organization is often the prime contractor. Like, for instance, a regional commission provides overall contract management in coordination with the Regional Transportation Office, and then that prime contractor is responsible for securing subcontracts with transportation providers to actually provide the service to consumers. And services are managed at the regional level with input from our partners at the local level in every area. Due to the difference in areas, like I said before, we're not a one-size-fits-all state where you can just say, okay, we're going to do it this way in each of our 12 regions. We really have to tailor it to meet the need of each area. Few statistical slides coming up here. This slide shows trips provided by consumer group. So each of our consumer groups, like we discussed on the previous slide, are served by the coordinated system. This has information from fiscal year 2013 through 2017. It's kind of tough to see, but on average, we serve about we provide about 2.3 million trips to between 15,000 and 20,000 consumers each year. And this slide breaks it down based on the individual consumer groups. So in FY17, we had the 2.3 million trips and served about 20,000 customers. The system has been in operation for 20 years as of FY19. We started back in fiscal year 1999 with pilot areas in 4 regions of the state, and now we have expanded to cover the entire state. The benefits of coordinated transportation include efficiency of operations and elimination of duplication of programs, staff, services, and vehicles. So, we've had growing pains for sure, and we have made a lot of changes along the way to try and meet the changing needs of the consumers, to be in line with federal requirements. We manage the 5310 grant, where DHS is the designated recipient for that grant from the Federal Transit Administration. So we too have the issues with allocations based on population and making sure that consumers are served to the maximum capacity using those funds. Our funding, the slide shows historical funding from fiscal years 2013 through 17, and we'll talk more about actual individual fund sources on the next slide. But coordinated transportation expenditures average between 25 to 28 million each year, and that comes from a variety of sources. The sources used are provided by our partners, along with the 5310 grant that I just mentioned, to meet the needs of elderly and disabled customers, as well as the other customers that provide funding for our system. We use internal reports and tools to track the variety of these fund sources. We also have a DHS in-house developed trip ordering system. It's called TRIPS for short. It's the Transportation Request Information Processing System, where consumers are registered and trips are ordered from partner organizations. So funding, we have a lot of fund sources that are used in coordinated transportation. So partners purchase services from coordinated transportation in the form of trips. Some of the fund sources provided by our partners include social service block grant funds, Title III-B funds from the Division of Aging. DFACS provides temporary assistance for needy family, TANF funds, and also SNAP funds, which are Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program funds. State funds are used primarily for match. There are minimal state funds in our system. And we also utilize DBHDD funds. We have an MOU with the Department of Behavioral Health to provide services for their consumers. So you can see that makes up about 41% of the funding for the system. So they provide a good deal of funds to make sure their customers are able to access services. A couple metro area counties also contract with DHS and provide funds for seniors in their counties to get to services. And methodologies used to allocate these funds are dictated by the fund source, like has been mentioned earlier. It's dictated by the fund source or requirements specific to the fund source. The 5310 grant is a portion based on the population of older adults and people with disabilities, in each area. Funds provided by the Division of Aging Services are allocated based on the intrastate funding formula, which is also dependent on population. And the other fund sources are allocated based on historical usage and trend analysis to best meet the need of each customer group. Our average one-way per trip cost in state fiscal year was $11.35, which has remained pretty static over the last several years. Coordination with other state agencies. So DHS transportation staff work very closely with the GDOT staff in the Division of Intermodal. We really appreciate that relationship and value it greatly. We have subcontracts and contracts with rural public transit systems located in rural areas across the state. In a couple areas of the state, we actually have the same contractor for DHS and the GDOT 5311 system. It's so beneficial because it increases efficiency. We are able to purchase additional services from the 5311 systems because of the cost savings, but we do provide, we purchase services based on trip rates. So we're paying the 5311 systems, or our prime contractor pays the 5311 systems, a per trip rate for each trip they provide for DHS customers. It decreases service duplication and, again, generates cost savings that enable us to provide more services. And even in areas where the prime contract is not shared with the GDOT contractor, often there are subcontracts with many 5311 rural public transit operators utilized anyway. So not just the two regions where we share the same prime contractor with GDOT do we utilize 5311. It's utilized across the state for DHS consumers. And of course, there are challenges with transportation. Next couple slides, I just want to give some examples of some of those challenges. Federal funding has declined due to federal grant modifications, not only the transportation-related federal grants, but also some of the other ones that I mentioned on the funding slide. And this constrains our ability to serve individuals who qualify. Eligible consumers are served based on priorities determined by the funding entity. So our partners in Division of Aging, DBHDD, DFACS, they're, with us determining who would receive services based on the funding they provide. And another challenge that faces providers, specifically in rural areas, is the distance and the time it takes to provide a trip to a customer that lives far from services. So, for example, in Savannah, individuals live about 10 miles from the senior center. So their average trip time is about 20 minutes on a coordinated transportation system route. But in the rural area of Effingham County, individuals live about 20 miles from the senior center, but their trip time is up to an hour based on, needing to stop for others, it being a rural area, picking up multiple folks. So providers are encouraged to utilize different sizes of vehicles to most efficiently meet the need, but this comparison makes it clear how challenging transportation is in rural areas. And then another example that is unfolding in the coastal area right now. Coastal Georgia Regional Commission is a prime contractor for DHS Coordinated Transportation and also for the GDOT 5311 system. And due to some decline in federal funds, they will not receive the amount of funding they have received in the past, so that will impact services. It's unknown exactly how that will impact their fleet of 62 buses operated by Coastal Regional Commission. But the intent is to ensure that transportation services are maintained so that places like Employability, that's mentioned on the slide. Employability is an organization that provides services to individuals with disabilities, and they rely on the Coastal Regional Commission system to get their folks to work. So we're all working together to make sure that those kinds of things continue. In the coastal area, 65% of the riders on that system come from DHS, so we purchase services from that system, and then the public makes up the balance of the riders. And on the flip side of challenges, DHS has several initiatives underway to improve transportation as well. DHS transportation staff are working to implement projects identified in coordination with our partners. This will increase transportation options and allow access to needed services within local communities. For example, we have some senior shuttle projects online that are planned to be implemented in state fiscal year 19. On the slide, I have Vidalia and Waycross. It's actually Vidalia and Tifton. I apologize for that typo. But in FY19, we are planning to implement these senior shuttles in Vidalia and Tifton. The shuttles will operate 1 day a week for about 6 hours, making the same stops each hour. Seniors have been involved and will continue to be involved in determining these shuttle stops. Current plans include stops at the pharmacy, post office, library, utility companies, and Walmart. Okay? And another project that is in the very, very early stages of planning is a possible pilot project with Lyft. DHS transportation staff is working with the Division of Aging Services staff on this. We're gathering the very beginning information right now. We have had a conversation with a contact that Division of Aging Services has at Lyft to discuss the option. So we're working towards that also because it's just such an obvious answer. We just need to make sure that we can overcome any barriers. And additional proposed initiatives for rural areas include implementing volunteer driver programs where the need exceeds available funds, and implementing voucher programs that reimburse non-family members to transport consumers to services. Those are also in the works. And that is all I have for you today. I welcome any questions.
Well, thank you for that information, and thank you for what your department's doing to try to improve this service. Any questions? What number are you? All right, Commissioner Ott.
Thank you. In your looking in implementing a pilot program with Lyft and Uber, I know in Cobb we've been looking at the same thing. And Mr. Chairman, one of the big issues that we've run into is liability insurance.
Yes.
Both Uber and Lyft are not real keen on assuming that responsibility, and it really has stalled a lot of the movement forward with Uber and Lyft because of the liability insurance. It's much lower cost on the rides, and it actually provides a better service, but Right now, one of the issues that we're trying to figure out how to deal with is liability insurance. Are you having the same problems?
Yes, exactly. That is actually something I have printed out on my desk to follow up on. That is a challenge. They're not the same requirements as the DHS contractual requirements. So we'll have to work that out before anything goes forward.
I see our Deloitte team writing all that down, because one of the things we're going to be doing is I'm going to be traveling to some of these other states, taking a look at what other states are doing and how they're partnering. So we'll see if there's something we can do to help with that also.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ott. Commissioner Hausman.
Follow-up to that, excuse me, that's kind of loud. We actually are doing a pilot project in Fulton. We've been doing it for about a year or so. I don't want to talk specifics about the liability issue, but I know our folks would be more than happy to work with you in our Senior Services Division. So see me after, and I'll help connect you with that. It's been very successful. We've eliminated our entire wait list. We've saved probably 2/3 of the cost per ride. So, and the seniors have embraced it. So, be happy to share that with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions? All right, Commissioner.
Yeah, this a little more of a comment than a question. Back on slide 7, it's the funding pie chart. I just would like to make sure everybody understood the average one-way cost for a trip is $11.35, but it depends on what that user is, what trip they're making for what purpose, which becomes a little bit of an accounting exercise, I'm assuming, and
Yes.
Given some appreciation from dealing with all these different fund sources. But that's the complexity. When you look at all those fund sources, that has to be accounted for, and all we're trying to do is provide a trip to wherever they're trying to get to. But that's the bureaucracy behind a lot of this, and I think that was a lot of the conversation from the rural greenhouse as well. Is the back office side of this is very complicated, which is regrettably why some things are siloed today, is because of the fund sources. But that's the opportunity to try to figure out how to simplify. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much
Thank
again.
you.
Thank you for being here. All right, we're going to take a lunch break. Before we do, a couple announcements. One, I'm sure most of you have gotten updates, but there was an incident outside of the Capitol today that is under control, but the Capitol was evacuated and the Judicial Building was also evacuated, so just be aware of that may still be going on outside. Also, I believe today's a special day for Charlie Harper, so happy birthday to you. I see him here in the audience. And then for the members of the commission, I'm providing lunch today in CLOB 605 here in this building on this floor, so please come by and eat on Kevin today. So we will stand adjourned until 12:30. We'll come back in at 12:30 and finish up, so we'll see you then. out of here before Atlanta traffic gets too bad, maybe, since we don't have a lot of transit options going up to North Georgia yet.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, well, a little further north than you are. All right, well, I'm next on the agenda, and we got a PowerPoint there. Kind of want to go over a little bit some of this with you. If I can get to the right page, because I can't see that far. All right, we'll look at a path forward as we think about moving forward between now and the end of the year and starting of the next legislative session. We've outlined there on the screen some project objectives as far as the next phase goes. Looking at number one, the idea around and looking at the possibility of designing a new governance model for rural transit that will allow us to better deliver these services and meet the needs of our citizens across the state. Number two, creative and innovative funding approaches. It's one of the things that we heard about today that came out during the rural greenhouse, the other urban center greenhouse, and we also heard even from Ms. Moss in Hall County some of the problems around funding. It's a very complicated process, so looking at how we can be creative in that process, both state, local, and federal dollars, but also ways to incentivize private partners and looking at some of the issues such as liability insurance and how do we overcome some of those roadblocks. And I know, like Commissioner Hausman says, we have some folks who have done that across the state, and how can we do that in all parts of our state. And then number three, support the legislative process. We'll do that through stakeholder outreach, communications, and to promote the desired governance and funding needs that we come up with through this commission. It's one of the reasons I think we were successful this last session was we had a good team of people from both our consulting team and through this commission, and the partners that we created with folks like Commissioner Ott, Commissioner Hausman, and Commissioner Nash Chairman Nash couldn't be here today, but what great partners they were during the process to help us when we ran into a roadblock, be able to help us get around that, and we appreciate that. So we're going to be looking for those same partners out in rural Georgia and other urban centers to help us with this process. So those are the objectives that we've outlined. If there's any other thoughts from the commission, would love to hear those if you've got any other objectives or thoughts, but we made them broad. Governance model, the funding are the two, and those were the two that were outlined in the original commission document that we passed in the House that created our commission, was looking at governance and funding. All right. Next is looking at the high-level approach moving forward, conducting a detailed analysis of the current rural transit system. We've already started doing that outside these meetings, breaking down and analyzing what's currently happening, defining the specific matrix and criteria of how to evaluate alternative models as we move forward. And we're doing that now. I think it's important. We have to understand where we are, what we have in the state and different parts of the state, both in rural Georgia and urban centers. And that's going to be ongoing, and we're going to be using our Deloitte partners to help with that process. Next, we're going to look at access, rural transit innovations, and best practices. You already heard, and we'll talk about some of those states in a few minutes that we've identified. There'll be some visits made to looking at how they're doing their transit services out in the rural parts of their state and outside their core metro area, and what can we learn from that. That was very helpful in the metro modeling that we did when we met down in Atlanta at the Metro Greenhouse. We were able to pull some best case practices from not only really all over the country, but in other parts of the world that we were able to look at that gave us some good ideas with HB 930. And then next is develop rural transit strategy and alternatives for governance and funding. This will be defining the funding model alternatives and looking at the possibility of doing some pilot programs. We heard DHS talk about doing some piloting with lift. Those are some of the things that we would like to look at all across the state through this commission and through possible legislation and setting this up is how can we have some plans moving forward and pilot some of those programs as we move on. And then, of course, last is working with state leadership and working with leaders in the House and working with leaders in the Senate and the governor's office as we bring forward policy recommendations that may result in legislation for next session. And as we do that, we're going to have to create stakeholder engagement, and that'll require a great deal of communication on all of our parts as we move forward. And then next steps, as we move into the rural part of this process, we're going to look at 5 major milestones in the prior to the next legislative session. We're going to be looking at having our next commission meeting. We'll be getting a date finalized and out to you here in the next few days, but sometime in August. And that purpose of that meeting will be a rural in-depth evaluation and criteria for future alternatives. We'll be looking at having that meeting somewhere up in rural North Georgia so that we'll be able to get out of the metro area and get out into the rural part of our state. So that'll be in August, and we will get a location and a date out to you in the next few days. And then in September, we're looking at doing a rural transit innovation and best practices report. That goes back to our one of our items that we already mentioned as we start looking at other states, looking how other states are doing transit in rural areas and best practices, and what we learned from that and bringing that back to this commission so that we can start drawing some conclusions of what might work here in Georgia and what might not work in Georgia, and comparing that to what we're already doing. And then in October or so, recommendations for a future rural transit governance and funding model as we start bringing what we're learning and start bringing some ideas to the table that we can start having some discussions around for governance and funding out in rural Georgia. And when we're talking about rural Georgia, we're talking about also those urban centers. Like we mentioned before, a place like Hall County, even though they have 200,000 in population, they're the economic center for a broader rural part of our state. And we have those areas all across the state: Columbus, Augusta, Macon, Valdosta, a lot of places across the state that have a larger urban center feeding a great larger host of rural communities around those. So we're going to be looking at those. And then sometime December there, identify processes to engage stakeholders during the session based on the recommendations that this commission comes up with. And then ultimately in December or at the first of the year, bringing forward a full commission report. One of the things that we have to do as part of this commission is prepare a report at the end of the commission. As you know, the commission was a 2-year commission with the opportunity for the speaker to extend it to a 3rd year. So we'll be coming up on our 2-year mark, and we'll be along with our policy analyst, Abby Day, who we appreciate all her work, and our Deloitte consulting team will be preparing a pretty major report that's going to go back to the speaker and others about the work of this commission. So we'll be looking at doing that and adopting that probably just shortly before session starts in January. One of the last things I'll mention to you on that is, and I just said we did have the opportunity to extend for a 3rd year. One of the things that we really have not spent very much time on during the commission, and probably will not have time to spend very much time on this the rest of this year, but if we do look at extending for a 3rd year that we could concentrate on, would be freight rail. It's one of the things that's also mentioned in the commission charter is freight rail. It's extremely important to our state all across Georgia. So that's something we're going to continue to look at as we move forward. Commission meeting schedule and topics, we mentioned that already as we move into phase 2, leading up to the 2019 legislative session. Those are our tentative ideas there. Of course, that last one should be January, January there. But anyway, August update, we'll have the update with the in-depth analysis. Then in October, we'll have the highlight and recommendations and summary of the commission reports from best practices that we look at. and then path forward to the 2019 legislative session. And then as we look at goals and objectives moving forward, if we choose to recommend to the Speaker that we extend our commission to a third year. Rural Transit Stakeholder and Outreach Approach. Again, we're going to have a team of folks that are going to be conducting outreach and engage stakeholders to find solutions, solicit input. They've already started that process. I know some of you have been invited to the greenhouse events. I cannot tell you how impressed I've been by those programs, how well run they've been. I've had the opportunity to speak at all of them that we've held. They're intense, 8 hours in a room with people who are different backgrounds, but all for the same purpose, and has the ability to bring out a lot of good information and some good paths forward. So that's going to continue as we move forward. You can see the targeted audiences there. We're going to be targeting transit operators, planners, and leaders. We're going to be talking to our state partners, GDOT, DCH, DHS, Department of Behavioral Services, and other local regulators. We're also going to be looking and talking with transit operators in places like Columbus and Athens and Hall County and other places across our state. Talking with private partners, car and ride sharing type programs. I'm going to be talking to planners and regional commissions. We've already started that process. Also, we're going to be talking with business community partners like the Chamber, Workforce Leadership, major employers. We've talked to folks like Keith Parker, who's now at Goodwill. We're looking at opportunities. Brian's looking at opportunities with workforce development. We're going to continue to do that, and how can we utilize transit to better improve our workforce opportunities across the state. You heard from Hall earlier how they're able to hire people, but they're not able to get them to the employment center, and that's important. Transit users, we're going to reach out to transit users, talk with them, regular commuters, college students, workers, transit dependent groups. We'll also be engaging them and talking with them about their needs, much like what Hall County talked about they had done around their work centers. And then we have the Rural Transit Best Practices Analysis. These are some of the best practices that were favorable that came out of our greenhouse participants as we listened to them and talked with them. And then there's been 3 states there that's up on the screen that's identified that are similar in several ways to Georgia, in that they have a large metropolitan center, but then they have a very rural state outside of that. Massachusetts there, and you can see their state funding. They provide 50% of the operating capital, and then capital, 36%. And there's some general information there about each of those 3 states and how they operate. But I think it's important. We're going to have team members actually put boots on the ground there in those 3 states, at least those 3 states, talking with the operators and talking with the state leaders there to see how they're doing it, how it works, and some of the things they've learned and mistakes that's been made, so that we can get some ideas of how to move forward. And there's other states that we've identified as possibilities also that we'll be looking at. And if anybody has any ideas or suggestions, we're happy to look at those also. So now, some questions for you all as you think about this, whether you answer them now or later. But what do you think our most important considerations are when we look at opportunities to improve rural transit, connect rural to other metro areas? I know there's a lot of ideas on the table, but if you've got thoughts on that, we'd love to hear those. And then what are the most critical challenges to rural transit from your perspective? Love to hear those. We've heard some of those today from Hall County and from DHS and others, but those are a couple of questions that we need to all be thinking about. So that's the end of the slides, so let me just open it up. If anybody has any thoughts on considerations for rural transit as we move forward, let's talk about that. All right, Chairman Taylor.
And just in the broad strokes, again, being a daily transit rider myself, reliability, safety, are huge considerations, and especially if you're coming from a rural area. Like I said, if you miss the bus by 1 minute, you've got an hour wait. So that timeliness of being available when you say it's going to be available, because I can't afford to miss an hour of work because the bus left 2 minutes early or something like that. From the law enforcement perspective, again, putting agreements into place that cross jurisdictional lines, security is definitely, and safety, the feeling of security is definitely important on transit. One thing that I've always pitched, and I haven't got much traction on it, but distance-based and time-based fares, like peak hour levels, and distance-based fares. If I go from here to 5 Points, it costs me the same as to go from here to North Springs. And like to look at that as an overriding IT infrastructure throughout a system where it's got commonality of fares, commonality of access, and things like that. So, my 2 cents.
All right, thank you. 24.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to also just thank you for all that you've done, particularly on the Metro project. I know a lot of people didn't actually see how much work you did, but those of us in the legislature did, and you did a yeoman's work, and you're to be commended. So I just want to publicly thank you for all your efforts there. And as someone from the rural parts of the state, I'm really excited about the opportunities to work on rural transit. I've had an opportunity to I've got a great relationship with my regional commission and my MPO out of Valdosta, and so I've had a lot of input with them about some of the challenges, and I think it's important as we move forward that we also gather a lot of input from these existing rural transit providers. In my area, there's been a provider that's been handling the DHS and the GDOT part for that whole Region 11 for, well, more than just part of 10 as well, for about 30 years. So I've met with them, with our DOT board member a couple of times, and just gotten a lot of good insight as to what the challenges are. So from my perspective, I think it's just, there's a lot to work on, and I think that we've got to figure out, there's all these federal pots of money. How can we get them to work with us as well? Because there's a lot of these things, unless they can help come up with a craft a solution, that we're going to have the same problems moving forward. But in our area, when you're talking about, getting somebody from point A to point B, and it being sometimes, 30 miles or so, 20 miles average, the secret's going to be using the technology like the Uber apps of the world to coordinate these trips to make them more cost effective, because from a provider standpoint, Lord knows what will happen if gas goes back to $5 a gallon. I don't want to say that loud, but you see what I'm saying from a cost standpoint. But thank you for all your work, and I'm really excited about the opportunities to hopefully we can make a difference for rural transit.
Thank you. I had a lady call me the other day. Well, she emailed me, and I called her because she made the mistake of putting her phone number on there. But she was from Valdosta, and she was complaining about a quote that I had made about the difference between Metro and rural transit, because I had indicated that in rural parts of our state there's a need for transportation to educational centers, transportation to medical appointments, and I think she thought I was being negative toward rural parts of the state and didn't understand rural parts of the state. And I asked her where she was from. She lived in Valdosta. I said, "You live in a city compared to where I live." So, but I do think it's important that we recognize there is a difference between the needs of not just rural Georgia, but different parts of rural Georgia. And we heard that somebody brought that out earlier, that one size doesn't necessarily fit all when we're talking about rural transit. So I think that's important. I know where I'm from, most people use the dial-a-bus program to get to the doctor, and most of the time it is the disabled and the elderly. And even though that's not all it's there for, those are the people who know about it and who use the service. And one of the problems that I know locally I hear, and it came up with Hall County earlier, is the service doesn't run at the hours people need it to run to actually use it to go to work, or to go get a GED, or to go to an educational opportunity. So all of those things I think we have to take into consideration. But I appreciate those comments. All right. Anybody else? All right, well, question 2 there, what are the most critical challenges? And we probably talked about some of those, and I think Chairman Shaw brought out a key challenge is that sometimes we have challenges we can do something about, and then we have challenges that we may have a difficult time doing anything about, and that's the federal process that's in place and how money comes to the state. And I know DHS and Commissioner Murray and others who deal with that on a regular basis know that frustration, but you know, I don't think we allow that to stop our thought process, because maybe we can have some conversations with our federal partners on how to streamline that process. But there'll be other challenges that we'll work through. Anybody else have any thoughts? Anything else from our Deloitte partners? Do y'all have anything else we need to bring up? If there are any we always, in all of our meetings, these are public meetings, they're filmed, they're out on the internet and streamed live, like all of our House committees are. We also always want to take public comment, so if there's anyone that's here that has a public comment that would like to come up and be heard, we'd be more than happy to do that at this time. Just if you would, just come up to the microphone and tell us your name and tell us who you're with, and we'll be glad to hear from you. Come on up.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity. I want to thank all the commission members for the outreach that you did to work with the Georgia Council on Aging. I'm Vicki Johnson with the Georgia Council on Aging, and I really appreciate the way that you extended us the opportunity to have input as HB 930 was developed. And some of the recommendations that we made were incorporated into the bill, and I think that they will set very good precedents for how we can bring good mobility and transportation to seniors. We know that seniors are 20% of our population, and we know that in 2014 there were almost 72,000 senior households with no car. So I was listening to the Consolidated Transportation, which provides wonderful service to many people, and the figure was quoted 20,000 people were served. Well, I'm thinking there are 71,000, 72,000 seniors in the state who have no car. So I appreciate everything you're going to be doing to help those seniors get to the critical care locations that they need in order to remain living independently in their lives and communities. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all your help and your willingness to work with us through HB 930. We'll continue that partnership moving forward. Anyone else that's here that would like to be heard? All right, if not, again, thank you to the members of the commission for being here today, for all your efforts you put forward so far, and what you're going to continue to do for us. We will get you out a date and a location to put on your calendar here in the next few days for the August meeting. And in the meantime, if you have any thoughts, please email them to us, any ideas. All of you have expertise in this area and have a whole host of contacts. So if there's things or people or ideas that you want us to explore, we have a great team behind us working with us. So just let us know what those are, and we'll be glad to take a look at them. And just we're excited about Friday and the fact that the Secretary of Transportation will be in town, and that Georgia was chosen to receive the largest grant in history for a road project. So thank you to Commissioner McMurray and his staff for all they do. So no one has anything with that. We stand adjourned. Thank you.